The radio crackled with static, then silence. In the operations center at Bagram Airfield, 23 sets of eyes fixed on the same grid coordinate flickering on the tactical display. The SEAL team had gone dark 3 minutes ago, their last transmission cut short by the unmistakable sound of heavy gunfire. Major Khalid Rahman leaned over the console, jaw clenched, watching the red icon that represented 6 of America's most elite warriors blink steadily in the Hindu Kush Mountains. The valley they'd inserted into was a kill box, surrounded on 3 sides by sheer cliff faces and enemy positions that had materialized like ghosts. The quick reaction force was 20 minutes out. Apache gunships were refueling. The AC-130 was grounded with hydraulic failure. Every option on the board led to the same conclusion. Those men were about to die alone. Then a voice cut through the tactical frequency, calm as morning coffee. Bagram Actual, this is Havoc 1-1. I'm 12 minutes north with a full combat load, requesting immediate clearance to engage. Rahman's eyes darted to the air tracker. A single A-10 Thunderbolt, call sign Havoc 1-1, returning from a routine patrol along the Pakistani border. He felt his chest tight. The valley was too narrow, the terrain too hostile, the enemy too concentrated. This wasn't a mission. It was a death wish. Havoc 1-1 negative, RTB and await QRF coordination. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Bagram, those men don't have 3 seconds, much less 20 minutes. I'm already turning inbound. Rahman slammed his fist on the console. Havoc, you are ordered to, but the frequency went quiet. The back of the operations center. A young intelligence officer named Marcus Webb looked up from his workstation, face suddenly pale. Sir, he said quietly, Havoc 1-1 is Captain Ryland Thorne. Rahman froze. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name, though most pretended they didn't. Ryland Thorne had been the punchline of ready room jokes for 3 years, the pilot who'd washed out of fighter selection and ended up flying the Warthog, the slow, ugly, unloved tank killer that real pilots mocked. She'd requested the A-10 specifically after her brother died in Helmand Province, killed when air support arrived too late. The jokes stopped being funny after that, but they never really stopped. Now she was diving alone into a valley that had already swallowed a SEAL team, and nobody in that operations center believed she'd come back out. The A-10 Thunderbolt wasn't built for beauty. It was built around a gun, the GAU-8 Avenger, a 7-barrel rotary cannon that could shred tanks and turn insurgent positions into smoking craters. Captain Ryland Thorne loved that ugly airplane more than most people loved their families. She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the twin turbofan engines respond with their characteristic whine, and dropped altitude as the mountains rose around her like the walls of a cathedral. Through her helmet visor, the valley appeared as a jagged scar in the earth, shadowdark and filled with the kind of terrain that made pilots religious. She could see the smoke now, thin columns rising from multiple points along the valley floor. The SEALs were pinned in a dry riverbed, using scattered boulders for cover while enemy fighters poured fire down from the ridgelines. Her targeting pod painted the scene in thermal white and black. 6 cold signatures huddled together, surrounded by at least 40 hot signatures maneuvering to flank them. Ryland's hands moved across the cockpit controls with practiced efficiency. Weapons hot, master arm on. She selected the gun first, always the gun, because the Avenger didn't just destroy targets, it announced arrival. The sound of that 30mm cannon was psychological warfare, a thunderous roar that made enemy fighters forget their training and remember their mortality. She armed 2 AGM-65 Mavericks, checked her altitude, and began her dive. The G-forces pressed her back into the seat as the A-10 dropped like a stone, the valley walls streaking past on either side. Her heartbeat was steady, her breathing controlled. This was the moment she'd trained for, the moment her brother never got. She keyed the radio. Havoc 1-1 is in hot. On the ground, Petty Officer First Class Devin Carrick pressed himself against a boulder, feeling the impacts of incoming rounds vibrate through the stone. His rifle was nearly empty. His radio operator was bleeding from a shrapnel wound. Their team leader, Chief Marcus Holt, was trying to coordinate fire discipline while simultaneously accepting that they were probably going to die in this godforsaken valley. Then Carrick heard it, a sound like the sky tearing open, a mechanical scream that grew louder and closer until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. He risked a glance upward and saw the A-10 emerge from the smoke, so low he could see the pilot's helmet. The aircraft rolled inverted for a heartbeat, the pilot checking her targets, then rolled back and opened fire. The sound was apocalyptic. The GAU-8 Avenger fired at nearly 4,000 rounds per minute, each 30mm shell the size of a milk bottle. The effect on the ridgeline was instant and absolute. Rock exploded. Bodies tumbled. The entire enemy position on the eastern ridge simply ceased to exist in a rolling wave of destruction that walked across the mountainside like the finger of an angry god. Chief Holt stared, mouth open, as the A-10 pulled up and climbed, already banking for another run. "Who the hell is that?" he shouted over the din. His radio man, blood streaking down his face, checked his tactical display with shaking hands. "Call sign Havoc 1-1. Single ship, it's... Chief, it's Captain Thorne." Holt felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd heard the stories, the jokes, the whispered comments in briefings about the pilot who couldn't cut it in the fast jets. He keyed his radio, voice hoarse. "Havoc 1-1, Reaper 6. You just saved our asses. We've got enemy concentrations on the West Ridge and more moving up the valley from the south." The reply came back immediately, that same eerily calm voice. "Copy, Reaper 6. Stay down. This is going to get loud." The A-10 came around again, lower this time, threading between the valley walls with a precision that seemed impossible for an aircraft that size. Ryland could see the enemy fighters scattering, some trying to set up anti-aircraft positions, others simply running. She selected the Mavericks and designated 2 cave entrances where thermal signatures clustered. The missiles leapt from the rails with a flash and a trail of white smoke. The explosions collapsed both cave entrances, sealing fighters inside and sending secondary detonations rippling through ammunition caches. Ryland didn't watch the results. She was already lining up her next gun run, her eyes scanning the ridgeline for threats, her mind calculating angles and distances. The A-10's titanium bathtub, the armored cockpit that protected pilots from ground fire, sparked and pinged as small arms fire found her aircraft. She ignored it. The Warthog could take a beating. That's what it was built for. She rolled into another dive, inverted again to check her firing solution, then unleashed another burst from the Avenger. The West Ridge erupted in dust and flame. Below, the SEALs began to move, using the chaos to reposition and establish better defensive lines. Chief Holt couldn't believe what he was watching. Every attack run was textbook perfect, every burst precisely placed to destroy enemy positions without endangering the friendly forces below. This wasn't just close air support. This was surgical, personal, delivered with a level of skill that made his chest tight. Back at Bagram, Major Rahman watched the tactical feed in stunned silence. The operations center had gone quiet, every person present witnessing something they'd never seen before. Captain Thorne had been airborne for 7 minutes. In that time, she'd single-handedly broken the enemy assault, eliminated over 30 fighters, and turned a massacre into a fighting chance. An intelligence analyst spoke up, voice shaking slightly. "Sir, we're picking up radio chatter from enemy positions. They're calling for retreat." Rahman found his voice. "All units be advised, Havoc 1-1 has gained fire superiority. QRF, expedite your approach." But even as he gave the order, he knew the truth. By the time reinforcements arrived, this fight would be over. Captain Ryland Thorne wasn't waiting for backup. She was finishing what she'd started. The A-10 screamed through the valley again, and Rahman realized something that made his earlier doubts feel like ash in his mouth. The jokes had been wrong. The whispers had been wrong. They'd all been catastrophically, shamefully wrong. Ryland's fuel gauge was dropping into the yellow. She had maybe 10 minutes of combat time left before she'd need to break off and head for the tanker. But 10 minutes was an eternity in a gunfight, and she intended to use every second. She pulled the A-10 into a steep climb, bleeding speed to gain altitude, then pushed the nose over and dove again. This time her target was a technical truck, a pickup with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed that was racing up the valley floor. The driver was trying to flank the SEAL position, probably hopping to set up a crossfire. Rylan let the targeting pipper settle, squeezed the trigger, and walked a burst of 30mm rounds across the vehicle. It disintegrated in a fireball that sent burning debris tumbling across the rocks. She keyed the radio again. Reaper 6, Havoc 1-1. I'm showing clear thermals on the ridgelines. How's your situation? Chief Holt took a breath, looked around at his team. They were alive. Wounded, exhausted, but alive. Havoc, Reaper 6. You just performed a miracle. We're combat effective and ready to move on your word. Copy that, Reaper. QRF inbound, 8 mics out. I'll maintain overhead cover until they arrive. Rylan throttled back and established a racetrack pattern above the valley, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. The A-10's loiter time was one of its greatest advantages. While fast movers had to leave after 1 or 2 passes, she could stay, circling like a mechanical guardian angel. On the ground, Petty Officer Carrick was helping the wounded radio man apply a fresh pressure dressing when he heard one of the younger SEALs speak. Man, I heard stories about Captain Thorne. Guys saying she couldn't fly, that she only got her wings because they needed quotas filled. Chief Holt turned, his expression hard enough to cut glass. You hear me clearly, Boot. That woman just did what an entire strike package couldn't do. She flew into a hot LZ alone, against orders, and pulled our asses out of the fire. Anyone who says different can answer to me personally. The young SEAL nodded quickly, properly chastened. Holt looked back up at the A-10 circling overhead, its distinctive silhouette black against the morning sky. The quick reaction force arrived in a thunder of rotors, Black Hawks disgorging Rangers who immediately established a security perimeter. The SEALs were extracted efficiently, professionally, loaded onto the helicopters with their wounded. As the last Black Hawk lifted off, Chief Holt looked out the open door and saw the A-10 still circling, still watching, making sure they got out safe. He keyed his radio one last time. Havoc 1-1, Reaper 6. We're clear and outbound. Thank you doesn't cover it, but thank you. The reply came back, and for the first time Holt heard something in that calm voice. Not pride exactly, something quieter, something that sounded like old grief finally finding purpose. Reaper 6, that's what we're here for. Get your boys home. The A-10 banked away, climbing toward the tanker that was waiting at altitude, and disappeared into the vast Afghan sky. Chief Holt closed his eyes and made himself a promise. He'd remember her name. He'd make damn sure everyone remembered her name. 3 days later, the after-action report landed on Major Rahman's desk. He read it twice, then called Captain Thorne to his office. She arrived in her flight suit, helmet bag slung over one shoulder, looking tired but composed. Rahman gestured to a chair. Sit, please. Ryland sat, her expression unreadable. She'd been expecting this meeting, had been expecting some kind of reprimand for disobeying orders and going in alone. Rahman steepled his fingers, studying her. Captain, I need to understand something. You violated direct orders. You engaged in an unauthorized combat mission. You put yourself in a $30 million aircraft at extreme risk. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Why? Ryland met his eyes steadily. Because 6 men were about to die, sir, and I had the capability to prevent it. The math was simple. The math, Rahman repeated, his voice neutral. He opened a folder, pulled out a photograph, and slid it across the desk. It showed a young Marine Lance Corporal, smiling in dress blues. This is why, Ryland said quietly, looking at the photo. That's my brother, Connor. He died in Helmand in 2019. His unit called for close air support. By the time it arrived, he'd bled out in a drainage ditch. Rahman felt the weight of that statement settle in the room. So you fly the A-10 because it can loiter, because it can get low and dirty, because it can stay with troops on the ground instead of making one pass and leaving. She looked up, and Rahman saw something fierce and unbreakable in her eyes. I fly the Warthog because next time, maybe somebody's brother comes home. Rahman was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the folder and stood. Captain Thorne, you're being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Chief Holt and his team have submitted statements. The recommendation is already being fast-tracked. Ryland blinked, clearly surprised. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, Raman said firmly. You went above and beyond your job. You saved 6 lives at significant personal risk. That's the definition of valor. He extended his hand. Ryland stood and shook it, her grip firm. As she turned to leave, Raman spoke again. Captain, I owe you an apology. I should have trusted your judgment. I won't make that mistake again. Ryland paused at the door, glanced back. With respect, sir, you didn't know me, but now you do. She left, and Raman sat down slowly, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, genuine awe. Word spread fast in military communities. Within a week, the story of Havoc 11's solo rescue mission had circulated through every forward operating base in Afghanistan. The details grew slightly with each retelling, but the core remained the same. 1 pilot, 1 aircraft, 6 lives saved. In ready rooms and mess halls, pilots who'd once made jokes about Ryland Thorne found themselves defending her. The culture began to shift, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. The A-10 community, always tight-knit, embraced her as one of their own. But it was the SEALs who truly adopted her. Chief Holt made it his personal mission to set the record straight. In briefings, in training sessions, in the quiet moments between operations, he told the story. Not as a legend, but as a testament to skill, courage, and the kind of dedication that defined the best warriors regardless of service or background. 2 months after the Valley incident, Ryland was flying a routine patrol when her radio crackled with an unfamiliar call sign. Havoc 11, this is Reaper 6. We're on the ground, could use some overhead if you're in the area. She smiled inside her oxygen mask. Chief Holt's team was running another operation, and he'd requested her specifically as close air support. Reaper 6, Havoc 11. I'm your guardian angel today. What's your situation? The mission went smoothly, no contact, but as Ryland circled overhead, she understood what Holt was really doing. He was sending a message to his team, to his community. This pilot is one of us. Trust her with your life because she'll die before she lets you down. It was the highest honor the ground combat community could bestow. When the mission concluded, Holt's voice came over the radio one last time. Havoc, Reaper 6, thanks for the overwatch. Beers are on us when you're back at Bagram. Copy that, Reaper. I'll hold you to it. That night, in the SEAL team's compound, Ryland found herself surrounded by hard men with harder stories, all of them treating her with the casual respect reserved for proven warriors. The drinking session turned into a tradition. Once a month, when schedules aligned, the SEALs and Ryland would gather, sharing stories and dark humor. She learned about their world, the brutal calculus of close-quarters combat, the weight of operating in the shadows. They learned about hers, the strange isolation of the cockpit, the responsibility of being the sky's judgment. Carrick, the young SEAL who'd questioned her reputation, approached her one night. Ma'am, I need to apologize for, Ryland cut him off with a raised hand. You didn't know, now you do, that's how we all learn, he nodded, grateful. Can I ask you something? What's it like up there when you're coming in hot? She considered the question, swirling the whiskey in her glass. It's like everything slows down and speeds up at the same time. You see everything, every rock, every muzzle flash, every person. And you know that what you do in the next 10 seconds determines if people live or die. It's terrifying and clarifying. Sounds like our world, Carrick said. Yeah, Ryland agreed. I think maybe it is. 6 months into her deployment, Ryland was called back to the operations center. This time it wasn't an emergency. Major Raman wanted her input on tactical planning for a major offensive in Kandahar province. She stood at the briefing table with Army colonels, Marine majors, and Air Force planners, all of them listening as she explained the A-10's capabilities in urban terrain. A Marine colonel interrupted. Captain, the fast movers can deliver precision munitions just as effectively with less risk exposure. Ryland nodded. True, sir, but they can't loiter. They can't adjust in real time to a fluid ground situation. And respectfully, when troops are in contact and they hear the Warthog's gun, it changes the psychology of the battlefield. The colonel frowned. Psychology isn't a measurable tactical advantage. With respect, sir, Ask the Marines who were at Fallujah in 2004 if psychology matters. A Marine lieutenant colonel at the end of the table spoke up. She's right, Tom. The A-10 saved our bacon more than once in Fallujah. There's something about that gun run that breaks enemy morale. The meeting continued, but Ryland noticed the shift. They were listening to her now, not just tolerating her presence. The offensive in Kandahar was brutal grinding, the kind of urban warfare that chewed up units and spit out casualties. Ryland flew 6 missions in 4 days, each one a knife-edge dance between supporting friendly forces and avoiding collateral damage. Her aircraft took hits, small arms, shrapnel, even a glancing strike from an RPG that left a scar across the left engine cowling. She kept flying. On the 5th day, she was running low on ammunition and fuel when a distress call came through. A platoon of Marines was pinned down in a compound surrounded, taking fire from multiple buildings. The QRF was engaged elsewhere. Apache gunships were Winchester, out of ammunition. Ryland checked her fuel gauge. She had maybe 15 minutes of flying time, barely enough to get to the target and then straight to the airfield. Her ordnance display showed 1 remaining Maverick missile and a partial load in the gun. She keyed the radio. Marine ground, Havoc 1-1. I'm 5 mics out with limited combat load. Send me your coordinates and the target buildings. Havoc, thank God. Targets are danger close, within 50 meters of friendly positions. Ryland felt her stomach tighten. Danger close meant the margin for error was measured in meters. 1 miscalculation, 1 gust of wind, and she'd kill the people she was trying to save. Copy danger close. I'm coming in from the north. Mark your position with IR strobes. She pushed the throttles forward, watching the city sprawl appear on the horizon. Smoke rose from a dozen fires. The compound came into view, a cluster of buildings surrounded by walls, with Marines visible in thermal signature huddled in the central courtyard. Enemy fighters were maneuvering through adjacent buildings, setting up for a final assault. Ryland selected the Maverick, designated the largest enemy position, and fired. The missile guided true, punching through a wall and detonating inside. The building collapsed, taking a squad of fighters with it. She rolled into a gun run, so low that her wheels nearly clipped the compound wall, and walked a precise burst across a rooftop position. The gun fell silent, the last of her ammunition expended. She pulled up, engine straining, fuel warning lights illuminating her cockpit. Marine ground, Havoc 1-1 is Winchester and bingo fuel. I have to break off. The Marine lieutenant's voice came back, breathless. Havoc, you just killed the fighters in position to overrun us. QRF is inbound, 3 mics out. You saved every life in this compound. Ryland didn't reply. She was too busy nursing her damaged aircraft back to base, watching the fuel gauge drop toward empty. She made it with fumes in the tanks, the A-10 rolling to a stop on the tarmac as the engines flamed out. The ground crew surrounded the aircraft, staring at the damage. The right stabilizer had taken shrapnel. The left engine showed scorch marks from the RPG near miss. Hydraulic fluid was leaking from a severed line. The crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Williams, looked up at Ryland as she climbed down from the cockpit. "Ma'am, you flew this bird back in this condition," she shrugged, suddenly exhausted. "Didn't have much choice, Sergeant." Williams shook his head slowly, something like reverence in his expression. "Ma'am, this aircraft should be in a museum." "You're a hell of a pilot." Ryland touched the scarred fuselage gently, almost affectionately. "She's a hell of a machine." That night, lying in her bunk, Ryland allowed herself to think about Connor. She wondered what he'd think of her now, if he'd be proud or worried or both. She wondered if all of this, the missions, the danger, the constant edge of death flying, was really about saving others or about punishing herself for surviving when he didn't. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did after a day like this. She stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the airfield, and thought about all the people who'd made jokes about her, all the casual dismissals and whispered doubts. Part of her wanted them to know, to understand that their mockery had been wrong. But a larger part didn't care anymore. Their opinions were irrelevant noise. The only opinions that mattered were those of the people she'd saved, and they didn't need convincing. 2 days later, her aircraft repaired and flight-ready, Ryland was back in the cockpit. The war didn't stop for reflection. It didn't care about personal growth or emotional revelations. It just kept grinding forward, consuming lives and leaving scars. She flew another mission, then another, each one blurring into the next. The deployment stretched on. Ryland accumulated flight hours, combat missions, and a reputation that spread far beyond her squadron. Pilots from other units requested her specifically when they needed close air support. Ground commanders knew her call sign and trusted it implicitly. The jokes had stopped entirely, replaced by something far more valuable, professional respect. But respect came with its own burden. Every mission carried the weight of expectation. People believed she could perform miracles, that she could save anyone, anytime. The truth was messier. She was skilled, yes, and experienced, but she was also human. She made mistakes, had close calls, felt the constant pressure of knowing that every decision could mean the difference between life and death. 3 months before her deployment ended, Ryland nearly died. She was supporting an Army Ranger operation in the mountains when her aircraft took a direct hit from a Zu-23 anti-aircraft gun. The shells tore through her right engine and shredded the hydraulics. The A-10 shuddered, rolled violently, and started losing altitude. For a few terrible seconds, Ryland thought she'd have to eject, leaving the Rangers without air support and potentially losing the aircraft. Then training and instinct took over. She fought the controls, using trim and throttle adjustments to stabilize the aircraft. The left engine was screaming, pushed beyond its limits, but it held. She managed to gain altitude, slowly, painfully, and limped toward the nearest friendly airfield. The tower cleared all traffic, emergency crews standing by. She brought the wounded Warthog down in a controlled crash landing, the aircraft sliding down the runway in a shower of sparks as the damaged landing gear collapsed. When the A-10 finally stopped, Ryland sat in the cockpit, hands shaking, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of fear. Then she unbuckled, climbed out, and walked away without looking back. The aircraft was a total loss, destined for salvage. But she was alive, and the Rangers had completed their mission. That was what mattered. The incident report praised her airmanship. The squadron commander recommended her for another decoration. But what Ryland remembered most was the crew chief, Williams, who'd maintained that aircraft. He found her in the mess hall that night and sat down without asking. "I heard what you did, ma'am," he said quietly. "Bringing her back instead of punching out. That took guts." "I couldn't leave the Rangers without cover," Ryland said simply. Williams nodded. "That's what I'm talking about. You put the mission first, even when it would have been safer to bail. That's the kind of pilot we need." They sat in companionable silence, two professionals who understood the unspoken contract between pilot and crew. Williams had kept her aircraft flying through impossible conditions. She'd brought it home, even when home seemed impossibly far away. That bond, forged in shared purpose, was deeper than friendship. As her deployment wound down, Ryland found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. She'd flown over 100 combat missions, expended thousands of rounds of ammunition, and directly saved dozens of lives. The military was recommending her for the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal with multiple oak leaf clusters, and a personal commendation from the theater commander. But the medals weren't what stayed with her. It was the faces. The SEAL who'd thanked her with tears in his eyes. The Marine lieutenant who'd said she saved every life in his compound. The young soldier who'd looked up and seen her A-10 and known in that moment that he was going to survive. On her last flight in Afghanistan, Ryland took the scenic route back to base. She climbed high above the mountains and the violence and looked out at the country she'd spent a year defending. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way. She understood why people fought for this land, why civilizations had clashed here for millennia. It was a place that tested you, stripped away pretense, and revealed who you truly were. She keyed the radio, broadcasting to anyone who might be listening. "This is Havoc 11 signing off. To all the ground pounders, door kickers, and quiet professionals, it's been an honor sharing the sky with you. Stay safe, come home." The replies came flooding in, call signs from across the theater, voices she recognized and voices she didn't, all of them offering thanks and respect. Chief Holt's voice cut through last. "Havoc, Reaper 6, you're one of us now, don't forget that." Ryland smiled, blinking back unexpected tears. "Copy that, Reaper, I won't." She landed for the final time, taxied to the ramp, and shut down the engines. The silence that followed was profound. Back in the United States, Ryland struggled with reverse culture shock. The world at home seemed disconnected from the war, going about its business while men and women still fought and died in distant mountains. She attended the award ceremonies, accepted the medals with appropriate humility, and gave interviews when required. But none of it felt real. The only thing that felt real was flying. She requested assignment to an A-10 training squadron, where she could pass on her experience to the next generation of Warthog pilots. The Air Force approved the request, and she found herself at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, standing in front of classrooms full of young pilots eager to learn. She taught them everything: tactical employment, threat avoidance, close air support coordination, emergency procedures. But more than that, she taught them philosophy. "The A-10 isn't about glory," she told them. "It's about the people on the ground. Every mission, every sortie, you're someone's lifeline. Treat that responsibility with the seriousness it deserves." The students listened, some with wide eyes, others with knowing nods. They'd all heard the stories. Captain Thorne, who'd saved the SEALs. Havoc 11, who'd flown a dying aircraft back to base rather than abandon her mission. One student, a young lieutenant named Kim with sharp eyes and sharper questions, approached after class. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" Ryland nodded. "When you were in that valley saving the SEAL team, were you scared?" Ryland considered the question carefully. "Terrified. Every time I fly combat, I'm scared. Fear is what keeps you alert, what makes you double-check your systems and think through your decisions. The trick is not eliminating fear, it's functioning despite it." Kim nodded slowly. "They say you're the best A-10 pilot in the Air Force." "They're wrong," Ryland said flatly. "I'm competent, experienced, and lucky. The best pilot is the one who brings everyone home. Sometimes that's me. Sometimes it's someone else. The goal isn't individual excellence, it's collective survival." The conversation stayed with Kim, who graduated top of the class and requested assignment to an operational A-10 squadron. Years later, flying combat missions over Syria, Kim would remember those words and understand their weight. The reputation Ryland had built followed her everywhere. She couldn't walk through an Air Force base without someone recognizing her, wanting to shake her hand or ask for advice. It was exhausting and humbling in equal measure. She'd never sought fame, had only wanted to do her job well and honor her brother's memory. But the military community had decided she was a hero, and there was no escaping that designation. She accepted it with the same quiet competence she brought to flying. The years passed. Ryland accumulated more flight hours, trained more students, and slowly allowed herself to believe that she'd found peace. She visited Connor's grave regularly, talking to the headstone like he could hear her, telling him about the missions and the people she'd saved. She liked to think he'd be proud. 7 years after the Valley incident, Ryland received an invitation to speak at the Naval Special Warfare Command. Chief Holt, now a senior chief and an instructor at the SEAL Training Center, had personally requested her. She flew to Coronado, California, and found herself standing before a classroom of SEAL candidates, telling them about close air support from the pilot's perspective. At the end of the session, one candidate raised his hand. "Ma'am, they say you're the reason Chief Holt is still alive, that you saved his whole team when everyone else said it was impossible." Ryland looked at Holt, who stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, a slight smile on his weathered face. "I flew the mission," she said carefully. "But Chief Holt and his team kept fighting, kept making smart decisions under fire. They saved themselves. I just provided support." Holt shook his head. "Respectfully, ma'am, that's bullshit. You didn't just provide support. You performed a miracle of airmanship and courage. These candidates need to understand that the bond between ground forces and close air support is sacred. You exemplify that bond." The room fell silent. Ryland felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, these young warriors who would soon face their own valleys, their own moments of crisis. She spoke quietly, but every word carried. The bond Chief Holt mentioned goes both ways. Ground forces trust pilots to show up, to risk everything to keep them alive. Pilots trust ground forces to make it count, to justify the risk. When that bond works, it's unbreakable. When it fails, people die. Never forget that. The candidates nodded, and Ryland could see understanding in their faces. These weren't abstract concepts. These were survival principles, written in blood and sacrifice. After the session, Holt invited her to dinner with some of his old team. They gathered at a beachside restaurant, watching the sun set over the Pacific. Carrick was there, now a chief himself. The wounded radio man, fully recovered, had gone on to become a communications specialist. They ordered too much food and told too many stories, the conversation flowing with the easy comfort of people who'd shared something profound. At one point, Carrick raised his glass. To Havoc 1-1, the guardian angel we didn't deserve but desperately needed. They all drank, and Ryland felt something warm and painful in her chest. These men had accepted her not as a curiosity or a symbol, but as a fellow warrior. That acceptance meant more than any medal. Later, walking along the beach with Holt, she spoke quietly. "Do you ever think about that day, the valley?" Holt stopped, looking out at the waves. "Every day, not because I'm traumatized, but because I'm grateful. You gave me years I shouldn't have had. I've watched my daughters grow up. I've mentored dozens of new SEALs. All of that is because you didn't follow orders, because you trusted your instincts." He turned to face her. "Thank you doesn't cover it, Ryland, but thank you." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They stood in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky. Ryland continued to fly and teach, the years accumulating like flight hours in a logbook. She watched new conflicts emerge and old ones metastasize. She saw younger pilots make the same mistakes she'd made and helped them learn without the cost of blood. She became a mentor, a teacher, a living repository of hard-won knowledge. But the A-10 community was shrinking. The Air Force, always eager to chase the next shiny fighter, wanted to retire the Warthog. Budget battles raged in Washington. Proponents argued the A-10 was obsolete, too slow for modern warfare. Opponents, usually ground combat veterans, argued the opposite. The A-10 was irreplaceable, the only aircraft designed from the ground up to support troops in contact. Ryland found herself testifying before congressional committees, speaking at military conferences, writing articles for professional journals. She became, much to her discomfort, the face of the A-10 community. She spoke not about herself, but about the mission, about the unique capabilities that no other aircraft could replicate. At one congressional hearing, a senator asked her directly, "Captain Thorne, isn't it true that modern fighters can perform close air support just as effectively?" Ryland met his eyes steadily. "No, Senator, it's not true. Modern fighters are exceptional aircraft, but they're not designed for loiter time, low-altitude work, or the kind of sustained fire support that ground troops need." She pulled out a photograph, the one from the valley, showing the SEAL team posing in front of her A-10 after their rescue. "These men are alive because the A-10 could get low, stay long, and deliver precise firepower in terrain where fast movers couldn't operate. That capability is not replicable by any other platform in our inventory." The senator nodded slowly, and Ryland could see the wheels turning. The A-10 received a reprieve, its retirement pushed back indefinitely. The ground combat community had won, at least temporarily. As Ryland left the hearing, she received a text from Chief Holt. "Well done, Captain. You just saved the Warthog the same way you saved us." She smiled at her phone, typing back, "Just doing my job, Chief, just doing my job." But the fight to preserve the A-10 was ongoing, exhausting, a constant battle against bureaucracy and budget constraints. Ryland began to feel the weight of it all, the years of combat and advocacy taking their toll. She was in her early 40s now, still flight qualified, still competent, but feeling the first whispers of burnout. She started thinking about what came next, about life after flying. It was a difficult contemplation. Flying had defined her for so long that imagining life without it felt like imagining life without breathing. Then, on a routine training flight with a student pilot, everything changed. They were practicing gun runs at the Bari Goldwater Range, the student in the front seat, Ryland in the back as instructor. The student lined up for the run, looking good, steady hands on the controls. Then something went wrong. The aircraft shuddered violently. Warning lights illuminated the cockpit like a Christmas tree. The student panicked, freezing on the controls. Ryland's voice cut through the chaos, calm and clear. "I have the aircraft." She took control, assessing the situation instantly. Hydraulic failure, both systems, the aircraft barely responding to inputs. They were too low to eject safely, too far from the field to glide in. She had maybe 30 seconds to make a decision that would determine if they both lived or died. She thought of Connor, of Chief Holt, of all the people she'd saved and all the lessons she'd learned. Then she thought of the student in the front seat, a kid barely 23 years old with his whole life ahead of him. The decision became clear. She located a dry lake bed ahead, a flat expanse that might be long enough. "Listen to me," she told the student, her voice steady. "We're going to crash land. When I say brace, you brace. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice shook, but he was holding it together. Ryland lined up with the lake bed, fighting the unresponsive controls every inch of the way. The ground rushed up. "Brace!" The A-10 hit hard, the landing gear ripping away instantly. The aircraft skidded across the lakebed in a cloud of dust and debris, the nose digging in, the tail rising. For a moment, Ryland thought they'd flip and cartwheel, which would kill them both. Then the tail slammed back down and the A-10 finally stopped, tilted at an angle, engine silent. Ryland took a breath, then another. "You okay?" "Yes, ma'am. Are you?" She checked herself quickly. Bruised, shaken, but intact. "Yeah, let's get out of this thing before something catches fire." They evacuated the aircraft, stumbling away across the lakebed. Behind them, the Warthog sat broken but intact, having protected them one final time. The rescue helicopter arrived 20 minutes later. As Ryland was being checked by the medics, she looked back at the crashed aircraft and felt something unexpected: gratitude. That ugly, unloved machine had carried her through combat, through crisis, and through one final emergency. It had done its job until the very end. The student, whose name was James Delgado, approached her as they waited for transport. "Ma'am, you saved my life. If you'd panicked, if you'd hesitated even a second, we'd both be dead." Ryland shook her head. "You kept your cool when it mattered. That training kicked in. You did fine. Only because you were there." He paused, then spoke with sudden intensity. "I want to be like you. I want to fly like that." Ryland looked at this young pilot, seeing echoes of her younger self, all that earnest determination and unproven courage. "Then focus on the mission, not the glory. Take care of the people depending on you. Everything else is just noise." Delgado nodded, and Ryland knew he understood. The crash made news, not because it was particularly dramatic, but because of who was involved. "Legendary A-10 pilot survives crash landing," read one headline. "Havoc 11 saves student in training accident," read another. Ryland ignored the coverage, focusing instead on the investigation. The crash had been caused by a maintenance error, a hydraulic line improperly installed during routine service. The mechanics involved were disciplined. New inspection procedures were implemented. The system adjusted as it always did, learning from failure. But the incident had consequences. Ryland's flight surgeon grounded her temporarily, concerned about potential injuries. The medical hold turned into weeks, then a month. During that time, Ryland found herself at a crossroads. She could fight to get back to flight status, could push through the medical bureaucracy and return to the cockpit. Or she could accept that maybe, just maybe, it was time to step back. She was 43 years old. She'd flown combat missions, saved lives, mentored a generation of pilots, and survived a crash landing. She'd done everything she'd set out to do and more. Perhaps the universe was telling her something. She requested a meeting with her squadron commander, a colonel named Barnes who'd flown F-16s before transitioning to a staff position. He welcomed her into his office, his expression sympathetic. "I heard about the flight doc's recommendation," he said. They want to keep you grounded for another 3 months minimum. I can fight it if you want. Your experience is valuable. Ryland sat quietly for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Sir, I appreciate that, but I think maybe it's time. I've had a good run. Let the younger pilots take over. Barnes leaned back, studying her. You're sure? You're one of the best pilots we have. Losing you would be a significant blow to the community. The community will be fine, sir. I've trained plenty of pilots who can fill my shoes, and honestly, I think I'm ready to find out who Ryland Thorne is when she's not flying. It was the most honest thing she'd said in months. Barnes nodded slowly. Understood. What are you thinking for next assignment? I'd like to stay in training command if possible. Ground-based instruction, curriculum development, maybe some work with the weapons school. I can make that happen. You've earned it. They shook hands, and Ryland felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Flying had been her identity for so long. Now she was choosing to step away from the cockpit, to become something else. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The transition was harder than she'd anticipated. Ryland moved to Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, taking a position as a senior instructor in the A-10 weapons school. She taught advanced tactics, threat analysis, and mission planning to the Air Force's most elite Warthog pilots. The work was fulfilling but different. She missed the physical sensation of flying, the connection between pilot and machine. But she found satisfaction in shaping the next generation, in passing on knowledge that had been earned through blood and fire. Students came to her with questions that went beyond tactics. They wanted to understand the psychology of combat, the moral weight of delivering violence, the cost of warfare on the human soul. Ryland answered honestly, never sugarcoating the reality. Combat flying will change you, she told one class. You'll see things, do things that civilians can't understand. The question is how you integrate those experiences. Do they make you bitter or better? Do they break you or forge you? That's your choice. One student, a captain named Tors, raised her hand. Ma'am, how did you handle it? Coming home, dealing with everything you'd seen. Ryland paused, considering. I talked to people who'd been there. I accepted that some days would be harder than others, and I found purpose in teaching and making sure the next person does it better than I did. But I'm not going to lie, it's ongoing. The war doesn't end just because you stop flying combat missions. Tors nodded, and Ryland saw recognition in her eyes. This was a warrior who understood the cost. The years at Nellis were productive. Ryland rewrote portions of the A-10 tactical manual, incorporating lessons from recent conflicts. She developed new training scenarios that better prepared pilots for the chaos of actual combat. She mentored students who went on to become the next generation of A-10 leaders, but she also began to engage with the broader veteran community. She spoke at events for military families, sharing her experiences and offering perspective. She volunteered with organizations that supported wounded warriors, bringing the same intensity she'd brought to flying. She discovered that her skills, calm under pressure, tactical thinking, decisive action, translated well to civilian crisis work. One afternoon, she received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Captain Thorne. The voice was vaguely familiar. This is Senior Chief Holt. Not sure if you remember me. Ryland laughed, a genuine burst of surprise and pleasure. Remember you, Chief. I think about that valley every time I teach close air support. How are you? Doing well, ma'am. Actually, I'm calling because I'm organizing a reunion. The team you saved, we want to get together and we were hoping you could join us. Ryland felt her throat tight. I'd be honored. The reunion took place in San Diego at a private venue overlooking the harbor. All 6 SEALs from that valley, plus their families, gathered to celebrate a simple truth. They were alive when they shouldn't be. Ryland walked into the room and was immediately engulfed in hugs and handshakes. These hard men, trained killers who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer, treated her like family. They introduced their wives, their children, their parents. This is Captain Thorne, Holt said to his teenage daughter. She's the reason you have a dad. The girl hugged Ryland, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for bringing him home. Ryland held her, feeling the weight of all those years, all those missions, crystallize into this single moment. This was why she'd flown. Not for medals or recognition, but for this. A father and daughter together, a family intact, a future that almost didn't happen. The evening unfolded with stories and laughter, the SEALs recounting their adventures with the dark humor of men who'd survived the unsurvivable. They toasted fallen comrades, remembered close calls, and celebrated the unlikely bonds forged in fire. At one point, Carrick stood and raised his glass. To Havoc 1-1, the best damn pilot any of us will ever know. You didn't just save our lives, you gave us futures. Every moment since that valley is a gift you gave us. The room echoed with agreement, glasses raised, voices joined in a toast that felt sacred. Ryland stood, emotion threatening to overwhelm her professional composure. To all of you, she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. You remind me why the job matters. Why we do what we do. It's been the greatest honor of my life to fly for warriors like you. They drank, and in that moment Ryland felt a sense of completion she'd been seeking for years. The war had taken much from her brother, her innocence, her illusions about the world. But it had also given her this, a tribe, a purpose, a legacy. 2 years after the reunion, Ryland retired from active duty. She'd served 22 years, flown over 4,000 hours in the A-10, and accumulated enough medals and commendations to fill a wall. Her retirement ceremony was attended by hundreds, current and former students, ground combat veterans she'd supported, fellow A-10 pilots who'd flown beside her. The base commander spoke about her accomplishments, her courage, her impact on the A-10 community. But the speech that mattered most came from Lieutenant Colonel James Delgado, the student she'd saved in the crash landing. He'd gone on to become an A-10 squadron commander, a rising star in the Air Force. Captain Thorne taught me that flying is about service, not glory, he said to the assembled crowd. She demonstrated that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. Everything I am as a pilot, I learned from watching her. The Air Force is losing a legend today, but her influence will continue through every pilot she's trained and every life they save. Ryland stood at attention as the flag was folded, as the final salute was rendered. She walked out of that ceremony